apologise, it may be slightly longer than that, but we're on a 90-minute debate. Catherine McKinnell to move the motion. Catherine McKinnell.
Thank you. I beg to move that this House has considered e-petition 604509 relating to child bed poverty, and it's a pleasure to serve under your chairship today. The petition being debated today asks the government to bring an end to child bed poverty by creating a national sleep strategy. It states, bed poverty is affecting educational outcomes for children across the UK. A national sleep strategy must resource local authorities to identify, address and ultimately end bed poverty. When I was presented with the title of this petition as part of our normal committee deliberations, I was quite frankly shocked. I couldn't help but question, how can bed poverty in our country possibly be a thing? But after listening to the petitioner and taking evidence on this issue, it quite evidently and shockingly is. So here we are, just days away from Christmas, and it's utterly depressing that some children will be asking themselves, all I want for Christmas is a safe place to sleep. And I want to start by expressing my admiration for the creator of this petition, Bex Wilson. As well as a hard-working deputy head teacher, Bex has also founded her own charity, Zarek, which provides beds for children living in poverty in the Leeds area. And I want to congratulate Bex on the recent arrival of a healthy baby girl, Viola. And I want to thank as well Bottle UK, End Furniture Poverty, the Sleep Charity, Orange Box North East, and a number of parents with lived experience of bed poverty for sharing their insights and experiences with me ahead of this debate. Because it's a distressing and shameful truth that in this country, child poverty has become a pervasive issue. More children than at any other point in the last decade are growing up in households that are unable to meet their most basic needs. The latest available figures suggest that in 2021, 3.9 million children across the UK were living in poverty. And since then, uplifts to universal credit and local housing allowance have been scrapped, inflation have reached heights not seen in 40 years, and an absence of support has pushed millions more families into desperate circumstances. So speaking to those who work on the front line of crisis services, it's undeniable that this figure of 3.9 million has been dwarfed by reality. But child poverty is more than just a statistic. It is a painful, grinding experience for each child living through it. It means growing up in stressful households, going without the same educational and development opportunities as their peers. It means going to school hungry or spending your evenings in a cold and damp home. And for many children, it means not having a safe space to sleep at night. I will give way.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. In my constituency, the BBEST group of 21 schools across Batley and Birstall have identified at least 163 of their pupils who do not sleep in their own bed. They either share with their siblings or sleep on their sofas or on the floor, which has a severe impact on their educational attainment, their development and family life. Charities like Zarek are incredible at providing beds for children in need, including in my constituency. But would she agree with me that these depressing statistics are a sad reflection of the current poverty within our communities, and the government must step up to help these families and provide local authorities with the funding that they need to eliminate child bed poverty?
Catherine McKinnell.
I absolutely agree with everything my honourable friend has said. And actually, the fact that she has that statistic, I think, is progress in itself, because I think that's one of the big challenges, is that we don't actually know the level of this form of poverty. And it's a hidden truth for many households that simply can't afford to provide each child a bed of their own. And speaking to families with lived experience of bed poverty, I heard some utterly heartbreaking stories. Children sleeping on infested sofa cushions because the only alternative is a wooden floor. And we know that would not give them the support for their growing bodies. Children sharing a bed with their siblings, as my honourable friend said, none of whom have privacy or can expect a night of undisturbed sleep. Children sleeping in a bath because it was the only safe space for them to rest. With all the resources and opportunities and potential that we have in this country, I cannot believe that this is the start in life that government thinks should be given to our children. Part of the problem, as I mentioned, is that there are no official figures that I can share with you to convey the scale of this problem. In 2018, Buttle UK estimated that there were around 400,000 children going to sleep without a bed of their own. That was 2018, so we know that this figure is wholly unrepresentative of the crisis that we know many families are now facing today. And the ongoing economic tumult has already left households struggling to put food on their plates and to heat their home. And when the cost of furniture has increased by 42% since 2010, the prospect of buying a bed for each of their children is simply out of reach for some parents. And rising financial hardship has combined with a whole plethora of concerning trends to make this issue of bed poverty, which has come to the attention of school teachers in particular, to make this issue particularly acute. Sadly, the COVID-19 pandemic saw a rise in cases of domestic violence. And as the increased number of mainly women who fled abusive partners, they were left with nothing but their children and a suitcase of clothes, if they were lucky. No furniture, no money to buy furniture with. Buttle UK have identified the pandemic as generating a sharp rise in need. Within the first year, demand for their grants increased by 70%, and the amount spent on beds almost tripled. Our country is also facing a housing crisis in which the most disadvantaged are particularly vulnerable. Families are moving to unfurnished homes to try and save some rent, just so they can keep a roof over their heads. But the idea that you can then secure beds, big bulky items, mattresses, new mattresses for each member of the household, and get them to an unfurnished property is just out of reach. Social housing rarely comes furnished. End Poverty Furniture Poverty found that just 2% of social homes include some form of furnishing, and that's compared to 29% of private rented properties. So given the very purpose of social housing is to accommodate the most vulnerable in our society, it does seem that this crisis of bed poverty, while shocking on the surface, is actually quite inevitable. The scale of bed poverty is really concerning when we consider how corrosive it is to a child's life. For all of us here, getting into our bed at the end of a long day is utter relief and second nature, something we take completely for granted and we couldn't imagine going without. So it'll come to no surprise that when I say that growing up in bed poverty has lifelong consequences. At the most fundamental level, a bed is a safe space for a child. It offers warmth, independence, privacy, and comfort. And it's especially important in high-stress households, which we know, when you're experiencing poverty, that's how it can be. A bed also provides a social function, a place for children to have sleepovers and build their friendships at school. Take that bed away, and a child is further exposed to the anguish and solitude that growing up in poverty can bring. Going without a comfortable space to rest also leaves a child unable to sleep properly. As a mother of 3, I know all too well how irritable children can be when they miss a good night's sleep. But the effect of sleep deprivation on a child's well-being is far more detrimental than just a day of being a bit grouchy. From low moods to persistent feelings of helplessness and isolation, the mental health impact of bed poverty is something no young person should ever experience. And parents can see the pain in this for their child. One mum told Buttle UK's Chances for Children campaign, "My children were angry and irritable, and the two of them would argue all the time because they were so tired. Both are bright and their schoolwork suffered. They were constantly late for school, and one started to take time off because he was so exhausted. His mood suffered, and he started to get depressed." I also spoke to one mother who had experienced bed poverty and was so grateful for the help that she'd received. And she described her child as overnight a different person from the day she received the bed with the sheets and the pyjamas, because that's what the charity provides. Woke up the next day a different child. And it was very powerful to hear that experience. And they share their experiences no matter how hard it is and how difficult it is for them to admit that that's the situation they found themselves in. but they don't want any child to go through that experience. The importance of sleep doesn't just stop at emotional regulation. It's actually important for so many physical and neurological processes that allow children to function and grow in everyday life. It's really important for brain reorganization, helping children to focus and process their thoughts throughout the day. It's when hormones are balanced, blood pressure is lowered, immune system regulated, and illness is fought. It's even been associated with reducing the risk of obesity and type 2 diabetes, all the way down to the very smallest levels a child's cells and body system perform such vital jobs during those stages of sleep. As Michael Farker, NHS consultant in children's sleep medicine said, "I describe sleep as like getting an MOT every night for your brain and your body. But the longer you leave it, the more problems are caused." And of course, with short-term challenges of sleep deprivation come lifelong consequences of bed poverty. Research has shown that pupils who get more sleep perform better at maths and science and in reading, markers of educational attainment which the government tell us are vital for securing good jobs in the future. And that's because sleep helps children to solve problems, develop their memory and learn effectively. How many times have you gone to bed on a problem and woken up with it solved? That's the power of sleep. How can we expect a child to concentrate throughout a day of education if their night's sleep was spent on a cold, hard floor or in a bath? That was the question Bex put to me after explaining the backstory of her charity, Zarek. After discovering that one of her pupils, was living in a home without a bed, the difficulties that she was encountering teaching conjugated verbs made more sense. Education has the power to improve opportunities, to give young people the ability to transform their lives, but for children living below the poverty line, it's their main hope of being able to escape a lifetime of deprivation. And the government recognises this, given one of the Levelling Up missions is for 90% of primary school-aged children to achieve the expected standard in Key Stage 2, reading, writing and maths by 2030. Yet the government stands by whilst children are deprived of that one shot of education through having a decent night's sleep. And even before the pandemic, disadvantaged children were already 18 months behind their peers at school, and COVID-19 we know has exacerbated that attainment gap, and this distressing trend is continuing. The Sutton Trust recently reported that 74% of the teachers it surveyed have seen an increase in pupils too tired and unable to concentrate in class. In what universe can you claim to be levelling up, where an increasing number of children are actually struggling at school because they don't have a bed? Now, the government has said it's acting on this issue. In response to the petition, and I'm sure we'll hear this from the Minister, it stated that there are several avenues of support already available to families affected by bed poverty. One of these was a budgeting advance, a loan available to universal credit and legacy benefit claimants, and the only source of direct government support for the cost of essential furniture. Yet in our evidence sessions, parents told me that these loans only condemn them into further poverty, because while it might allow them to buy a new mattress, a cost of £100, I would say, at the lowest level, they're then left hopelessly trying to pay that back on an already stretched and insufficient income, and they're trapped in a cycle of deprivation and debt.
Give way. Would you agree with me that maybe the government needs to think a little bit out of the box when it comes to bed poverty? I'm very fortunate in my constituency of Batley and Spen. I've got a fantastic range of bed manufacturers, and I wonder if the government may consider thinking about working with them to think about a scheme that they could put in place to help families who might be struggling. Would you agree that might be a good suggestion?
So I think definitely the government need to think out of the box and take responsibility for this issue, and I'll come to exactly why. And I think what my honourable friend points to is very much what the charitable sector has been doing, working with local bed manufacturers who are, coming up and solving in very localised ways. But this is a national issue and it needs a national response. And that is, I think, the point that the government really needs to listen to today. The anti-poverty charity Turn to Us made a similar assessment. It identified the 2013 conversion of the Social Fund grant into a budgeting loan as a single biggest erosion of help for those living without household appliances. And for those unable to access these social security advances, there's an alarming trend of parents becoming victim to predatory high-interest loan organisations because they just can't see any alternative to securing a peaceful night's sleep for their children. And rather than giving a helping hand to families facing unimaginable hardship, these means-tested, loan-based provision of support is pushing families into even more desperate circumstances. So the government is likely to state, and they have said in response to this petition, that councils in England have been empowered to establish local welfare provision, another claim that seems very detached from the reality faced. Over a decade of austerity has had catastrophic consequences for local authorities. Chronic underfunding has left them permanently uncertain about their future, unable to deliver long-term transformational policies that communities in crisis need. This year's autumn statement doubled down on this trend, forcing yet another real terms cut to local authority budgets. And it's needless to say that this has impeded the ability of councils to address bed poverty, end furniture poverty, has consistently challenged the alarming diminishment of local welfare assistance schemes across the country. In November, it found that more than 1 in 5 local authorities in England had closed their scheme, leaving over 14 million people without access to crisis support. And whilst the government is likely to indicate that this deficit has been bridged by the Household Support Fund, this doesn't offer hope to children sleeping without a bed. With tight spending deadlines, guidance provided at short notice, many local authorities have been unable to develop the infrastructure to ensure that they're meeting all these areas of need. Often the fund has been given as direct grants to people on certain benefits or to third-party organisations such as food banks. Now, of course, I'm not here to suggest that these are ineffective or unsuitable ways for local authorities to distribute the support fund. A well-fed child is just as important as a well-rested child. However, it is indicative of the insidious nature of child bed poverty, which being largely absent from public awareness, and I hope that's one thing that comes out of this debate today, that people realise it is a thing, that it's become impossible to address despite the very best efforts of charities. And that's why Bex and the supporting petitioners are calling on the government to create a national sleep strategy. Storing, transporting and providing beds poses a number of financial and logistical challenges. And given this, they fear that the funding will inevitably continue to be directed to prop up other frontline services. Petitioners therefore want the government to explicitly commit to ending child bed poverty and ensure that councils have the resources and the capacity to do it. A national sleep strategy also has the potential to address several other related issues. For Orange Box North East, it could mean developing the infrastructure to stop good quality pre-loved furniture going to landfill, instead diverting it to families in need of an affordable option. For the sleep charity, it could provide much needed education to an increasingly sleep-deprived teenage population, which we know is a big issue. How can we help children to develop healthy behaviours of a good night's rest, though, if they don't even have a bed to sleep in? And there are so many people with expert insight and drive to really create a brighter future for our children. But if they're left filling a void of a government which is failing to provide children with a safe space to sleep at night, this is opportunity wasted. Yet despite all the possibilities that a national sleep strategy holds, my discussions with charities led me to one conclusion. Until the government finally steps up and commits to end child poverty with a joined-up, cross-departmental approach, there will always be children growing up without a bed. It's absurd that our country is facing such desperation that charities are being forced to compete over which symptom of child poverty the government should pay most attention to. It's not enough to leave an overstretched and under-resourced third sector relieving the physical manifestations of child poverty, nor repeating the tired lines about importance of getting parents into work when 70% of children living below the poverty line come from working households. What our children need is a coherent, cross-departmental, anti-child poverty strategy matched with ambition and investment. We need action on the social security system, on insecure, low-paid work, on housing, on education, on our early years sector, and so much more. We need more than yet another pot of funding for crisis support, enough of the sticking plasters, which are simply patching over the trauma that is crippling our country. Despite its seeming normalisation, child poverty is not inevitable. The last Labour government proved it and turned those figures around. But whether they're going without a bed, food, a warm home, decent clothes, children will continue to be crushed by the pressures of poverty until we see that commitment from the government again. So, Chair, as I bring my speech to a close, I have a few specific questions to put to the Minister for when he responds. Can he commit to ensuring that there is a definition of child bed poverty within government to understand and to start to measure the extent of the problem? Can the Minister also set out what work the government has undertaken with third sector organisations to understand the level of child bed poverty in the UK? Will the government review regulations within the social housing sector to ensure that those without access to furniture have some protection when they move into new properties? And does the Minister recognise the financial challenges that loan-based support poses for families in hardship and often in crisis? And would he agree that conversion from a grant was the biggest erosion of help for those living without household appliances, which is what it has been assessed as? And can the Minister consider the request from petitioners to ensure that all local authorities are provided with dedicated resources to fund local schemes and support families living in crisis of bed poverty? And finally, does the Minister agree that this issue of child bed poverty is part of a much wider issue, the scandalous level of child poverty in the UK? And will the government commit to that cross-departmental, laser-focused strategy to eradicate it urgently? Chair, I recently visited a school in my constituency and I spoke about my preparations for the debate today, and I can still see the shock on the faces of pupils when they heard that there are children just like them growing up without a safe space that so many take for granted, a bed. A bed of their own is the bare minimum we should expect for every child in this country, and I can't believe still we're even having this debate today. Even those pupils knew that bed poverty was nothing short of a crisis, but it is part of a much wider systemic problem under successive Conservative governments, and we have seen child poverty increasing in this country. More and more children growing up in households without the very basics, whether it's food in their stomachs, heating in their home, clothing on their backs, or, as this petition highlights, a bed. It should be a source of immense shame that we have children sleeping in the bath, on the floor, sharing beds. As a society, we are failing our children and taking away their futures. And as the cost of living crisis continues to hit households in the UK, facing double-digit inflation, it's clear this problem is only going to get worse. So the government can and must do much more. It's not a mere bystander to this issue. It's our only hope of tackling it. With a laser-focused, joined-up strategy, the government can lift children out of poverty, and only then can we be sure that all children will have a safe space to lay their head at night. And I really hope the Minister hears this call today and that the government finally take action on this issue.
Thank you, Catherine McKinnell, for moving the motion on today's debate. The question is that the House has considered e-petition 604509 relating to child bed poverty. I call Holly Lynch.
Thank you very much, Mr Paisley. It's a pleasure to serve under you as Chair this afternoon. Can I thank my honourable friend, the member for Newcastle North, for her work on the Petitions Committee, having provided the time and made this petition a priority, and for also setting out in really stark way the pervasive nature of this type of poverty and how it is affecting children. Join her in paying tribute to Bex Wilson, who started the petition. This debate has very much shone a light on just how prevalent and stark bed poverty is throughout the UK. According to the DWP's own figures, households below average income survey, 26% of children have parents who want to replace worn-out furniture but can't do so. And 19% of children surveyed have parents who want to have a bedroom for every child aged 10 plus of a different gender, but also cannot afford to do so. I recently spoke to Calderdale Lighthouse, who are a volunteer-run charity in my constituency, and I very much pay tribute to Diane Barker and her fellow co-founders, Donna and Emma, who do incredible work at Calderdale Lighthouse at supporting disadvantaged families. But as the cost of living crisis continues to bite, in recent weeks they've received an ever-constant stream of requests to help provide bedding and beds for vulnerable families, in addition to the other range of support that they provide. In one instance, a health visitor for a family consisting of a single parent, a mother and 2 young children, neither of the children had beds, and asked if Calderdale Lighthouse could provide them. In another case, Calderdale Lighthouse provided blankets, duvets and hot water bottles to a family who had no gas or electricity and had taken sleeping in one room in an attempt to preserve heat. On average, Calderdale Lighthouse receive a request for beds, cots or toddler beds more than twice a week. They've also had instances where they've been told that victims of domestic violence are choosing to go back to their abusive partners so that their children are not left cold and without beds. There are also a number of cases where young children who have continence challenges and families have really struggled to provide the beds and bedding necessary to provide support for those children. Charities like Calderdale Lighthouse provide such an important lifeline for so many people. And for so many of us, we just cannot imagine that the ability to sleep in a proper bed would be a luxury, but for too many children it is. As whilst creating unhealthy and dangerous living conditions, bed poverty has a devastatingly long-term impact. This disruption caused permeates through every aspect of a child's life and development. How can we possibly expect children to learn, grow and realise their true potential if they come to school exhausted and weighed down by a disruptive night's sleep the night before? One of my constituents recently got in touch to powerfully explain this problem. They said, "I currently reside in a one-bedroom flat on the 15th floor, which is not ideal. We are overcrowded. My son cannot develop to his full potential in this tiny flat. He also needs his own bedroom as he has trouble sleeping, meaning he's then disrupting my daughter." We know the link between child poverty and children's outcomes is a clear one. Data from 2014 showed that less than a third of Calderdale pupils in my area claiming free school meals achieve 5 or more GCSEs at grade C or above, including English and Maths, compared to nearly 60% of all pupils. Unfortunately, bed poverty is systematic of a wider trend of growing poverty. Under this government, the proportion of children in poverty in my constituency has steadily grown. According to the House of Commons Library, 30% of children in Halifax live in relative poverty, which has grown by over 6% since 2015. A further 25.8% of children in Halifax live in absolute poverty. I want every child to have a chance to fulfil their potential, but the cost of living crisis, on top of years of austerity, has taken us back to an almost Victorian era for some families. Under this government, work no longer represents a route out of poverty. According to the House of Commons Library, like my honourable friend, 65% of families in relative poverty in Halifax are classified as being in work families. Bed poverty is not seen by many in our society, and frankly, again, like my honourable friend, I don't receive the direct contact about this because it is hidden, with most of those referrals to local charities like Calderdale Lighthouse coming via social workers and health visitors who are required to involve themselves in people's lives and visit homes. If they weren't there undertaking those roles, deprivation like this would probably go completely unseen, and I very much pay tribute to them for being in those homes, for raising the alarm and for being able to undertake that work day after day, which I can only imagine has an impact on them as well. This debate has very much shown that there are children suffering in this way up and down the country, and it's hidden away in people's homes, away from the line of sight, and it's the reality of just how many children will go to bed in insufficient conditions tonight. We can clearly see the incredibly detrimental impact that it's having on children's broader outcomes. We all bring problems and injustices to Parliament. It's part of our job, Mr Paisley. But I say, in all honesty, this is one of the hardest features I've ever had to write or to prepare for or to give. So heartbreaking is the reality of bed poverty.
Thank you. Before I call the front bench, just checking anyone else in the back bench wants to speak. No, that's fine. Opposition spokesperson, Sarah Owen.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr Paisley, and it's a pleasure to see you in the chair. I'd like to congratulate my honourable friend, the member for Newcastle North, for her work on the Petitions Committee, but also for introducing this debate so effectively, so passionately, so knowledgeably, and importantly, so sensitively. Thank you. Like others, I'd also like to thank Zarek and also Crisis and Bernardo's for their supportive work in these areas as well. Although we might be few in numbers here today, I know we speak for many of our colleagues in expressing our distress over any child going without the space and comfort to sleep. As we've heard, children need sleep and a safe space to grow and to learn. It's essential for neurological development, for absorbing what is taught at school, and building up a memory store for adulthood. A point put so well by my honourable friend from Batley and Spen, where at least 163 children do not have a bed of their own. She highlighted the horrific impact this is having on their education and on their emotional well-being. Sleep is as important to a healthy lifestyle as limiting fast food and running around the park. But too often, we can forget that as we get older. It's also a hidden level of poverty. It's not something that parents or families or even children are willing to share. It is hidden away from sight. For any other parents here, we know that children's sleep is crucial for our sanity too. Behaviour, along with physical and mental health, are drastically impacted by the amount and quality of sleep. Studies in China in 2021 found that the quality and length of sleep directly correlated with levels of depression and anxiety later on in adolescence. Salient points have been made by honourable members throughout this debate. My honourable friend, I want to touch again from Newcastle North, talked about the scale of the child poverty we see in this country. 3.9 million children in poverty. 3.9 million children in poverty in 2022. That should shame any government of any colour into action. And when we're talking about bed poverty, the horrific impact this has on a child's education and well-being will ensure that this cycle of poverty and deprivation just continues, and we need to break that for good. My honourable friend from Halifax pointed out the growing levels of child poverty. We're not seeing a decline, we're seeing growing levels of child poverty. In places like Halifax, 30% of children growing up below the poverty line. And it's the cost of living crisis, plus the pandemic, plus the years of austerity that have created this perfect storm that is allowing child poverty to continue. And as we've heard, the constant mantra, and I think almost guilting of parents, to say that work is the best route out of poverty. But we know that there are millions of people that go to work, do the right thing, work all the hours that they can, and yet are still paid below poverty wages. And that is an absolute disgrace. And a member from Halifax is absolutely right to thank the charities and the social workers who are that backstop for families, but it shouldn't be this way. And I genuinely cannot believe, when I was preparing for this debate, I cannot believe in 2022, in the 6th richest country in the world, we're talking about children going without beds. I'd like us to invite us all, Chair, to picture the scene. A family Christmas, with sparse food on the table, if there is indeed even a table. Mum and Dad worried about paying the rent, grandparents shivering in the cold and dark, kids sharing single beds, sleeping on the sofa, or even on the floor or in a bathtub, as we've heard. This sounds Dickensian, but it is in fact the prospect for too many of our constituents as they face hard times this Christmas. Crisis estimated in 2020 that 30% of families on the lowest income could not afford a bed for their child. Can the Minister provide an updated assessment of the figure as it stands now, please? After a prolonged pandemic, energy price rises, inflation rocketing, and a catastrophic recession. The housing crisis is nothing new, Chair, but it is reaching new heights of impact. Last Christmas, 1,300 families with children were living in unsuitable B&B accommodation over Christmas. Already a rise of 3% on the year before. with an added recession, will the Minister tell me how many more families with children are in temporary accommodation for Christmas 2022? And is his department investigating how many of those are living in unsuitable, overcrowded conditions, perhaps also grappling with dangerous levels of mould, damp and cold? Because the gap between housing benefits and standard private rent is also increasing. New research by Crisis found that fewer than 1 in 12 homes advertised on Zoopla were affordable for renters receiving housing benefit, compared with 1 in 8 just 5 months ago. And with Section 21 eviction notices still not banned, 3 years after their election on a manifesto that it promised, this government are only pushing more families into homelessness, more children into bed poverty. When will we see the ban on Section 21 no-fault evictions come into place? Or do we have to wait for a Labour government to finally get rid of it? Because again, this topic of debate leaves us all asking why. In a country as wealthy as ours, why are we grappling with something as basic as children not having the space to sleep? As with food poverty and fuel poverty, bed poverty is just part of the wider scope of deprivation in our allegedly world-leading country. If a parent can't afford to give their child space to sleep, it's unlikely they're managing to comfortably pay their bills, feed them well and provide for them as any parent would wish to do. As my honourable friend from Newcastle North said, this leaving families, poverty levels, leaving families teetering on the edge and at the mercy and prey of legal loan sharks still. Children's charities Barnardo's set up an emergency fund in October of this year to provide urgent support to children, young people and families dealing with the cost of living crisis. Although originally envisioned to help with food costs and energy bills, Barnardo's have already seen a concerning demand for beds and bedding. In Luton, in my constituency, our Labour Council released a 2040 report with a vision for where our town would be in 2 decades' time. This vision is not a shy one. We aim to eradicate poverty in our town by 2040 and build a child-friendly town. And I'm really proud of this aim, as I'm sure everybody should be within local government. It's bold, it's ambitious, it's inspirational, it's everything local government should be. But we've got to contend with a government in power imposing 12 years of austerity on this country. Local communities have to take matters into their own hands for the sake of their people. But local authorities are fighting a constant battle of inflation, of costs, of cuts and of rising demands now. And local authorities have already lost 60p out of every £1 in government funding since 2010. But they'll fight tooth and nail. I know they will. They'll fight tooth and nail to support the residents in need, especially children. So when will our government finally take responsibility for the children it should be protecting and caring for? When will all children have a safe bed to sleep in? I look forward to hearing the Minister's solution to this problem because I know it is one that we would all want to see solved. And I hope that not too many families in the UK will be facing cruel, cramped Christmases this year. And Christmas is supposed to be a time of hope. And I genuinely hope that this Dickensian, Conservative-induced nightmare of child poverty levels at this rate that we're seeing finally comes to an end before we see another generation harmed.
Thank you. Minister.
Thank you, Ms Paisley, and thank you for the opportunity to respond to the debate today. It's a pleasure to serve under you. And I'm grateful to all the honourable members who have spoken in the debate. As the honourable member for Luton North, I believe, said, apologies if I've got that wrong, we are small in number, but I'm grateful for the opportunity to be able to discuss this. And I'm grateful to the honourable lady from Halifax, from Batley and Spen, who's no longer in her place, for the contributions they made, and in particular to the honourable lady from Newcastle-upon-Tyne North for introducing this. But as honourable members have already done, in particular my thanks to Bex Wilson, the founder of Zarac, who's also already been referenced on multiple occasions for the great work that her and her colleagues have done in West Yorkshire, and for highlighting some of the challenges which are experienced here and which she has seen on a local level within Leeds, and which I accept there are challenges in other parts of the country as well. And I would like to pay tribute to her organisation and its brilliant work to provide beds for families who are struggling, especially those with young children. As the Honourable Lady for Luton North said a moment ago, I think we all share the same end, and that is that we do not have families or children who need support, who don't have access to beds, who don't have the ability to be able to have a good night's sleep, which we all both benefit from and that sometimes need and often need in order to be able to make progress the next day and next week and the next month going forward in our lives. And it is down to all of the people who work day in, day out to ensure that children can sleep safely and comfortably in their own home, that hopefully we have made progress on that over recent decades, whether that be as part of wider work to educate, to support, or to ensure welfare is in place. On sleep, we absolutely agree that it is important. The Honourable Lady from the Opposition Mention from Luton North talks about a number of studies from China, and there is also research that has been carried out by the University of Maryland in the United States that found that preteens who sleep less than or fewer than 9 hours a day had noticeable differences in brain structure, mood and thinking compared to their peers who had sufficient sleep each night. And although, of course, science will always be developing in these areas, I think it's recognised that sleep is a hugely important part of ensuring that people are ready for the day, next day that they need to face. So if we agree on the issue and we agree that it exists, which it does in certain places, we may take different views about how much it exists by, and I accept the point that it is difficult sometimes to understand the level of challenge here and the like. The question is what we do next. And of course, we all want to ensure that there is support for those who are in need. We want to find the best way to make sure that we can cover that need. We want to highlight the amazing work of the volunteers, both from Zarac and wherever else that is happening elsewhere in the country. And I do want to acknowledge there are understandable concerns about why, at times, the system does not work as perfectly or as well as we would ideally like it to. No system with hundreds of billions of pounds in it will work perfectly, but the job of government is not to claim that the system is perfect, but to recognise that there are challenges and to try and structure that system in a way which works, whilst ensuring that we don't change the way in which people work and operate or incentivise where they are able to, and I recognise that not everybody is able to, but where they are able to be able to resolve some of these issues themselves. And so that all brings a question, which is what ultimately we do when we see issues and problems like this, and secondarily, what it is proportionate for government to do and how government should respond when they see issues like this. And what I would say, and the Honourable Lady from Newcastle upon Tyne North anticipates some of the points that I'm likely to make, we do think there is a substantial amount of work going on at the moment across government to both provide a system of support for vulnerable children and for families, which includes within it hopefully the ability to tackle sleep deprivation and the drivers behind it. And I want to spend some time that we have just explaining how this work is broken down between the Department for Work and Pensions, the Department for Education, and the department which I serve in, which is the Department for Local Government, and why, given that plethora of initiatives across multiple departments at this current time, we don't think that a national sleep strategy is at this time the way to go, because we think that there is a substantial amount of work that is already underway, and we hope that it is helping in this difficult and challenging area. I will start from the top line, which is about tackling poverty. It's the question that the Honourable Lady from Newcastle upon Tyne ended with in her speech. And we absolutely recognise that there are often multiple complex reasons why families find themselves in poverty. And the Honourable Lady for Newcastle upon Tyne North highlights or suggests that the government is a mere bystander. And that's something that I find difficult to evidence in terms of what we are doing. This year we are going to spend the best part of £250 billion, through the welfare system, 245 billion, which is seeking to tackle these kind of causes head on. It's seeking to recognise that there are vulnerable people out there. It's seeking to ensure that people have the support they need. And that includes around £110 billion of support for people of working age, who are most likely, of course, to have children. And whilst I don't want to move this, I'd be very happy to give away.
I just wanted to challenge the Minister on his statement, because I didn't say that the government was a bystander. I said the government is not a bystander in this issue and has the power to do something about it. So I just want to clarify that, because the concern is all of these things that the government may be doing, the government is also the architect, in my view, and I think in the view of many people in this area, of the problem. And so I appreciate all the initiatives the Minister is outlining, but they're clearly not solving the problem.
Minister.
I'm grateful for the clarification, and I apologise if I inadvertently suggested something that I wasn't intending to do. I was merely trying to contextualise, which I know the Honourable Lady accepts in the point that she has outlined, that there is a substantial amount of work going on here, and that both needs to be acknowledged within the wider discussion of why we are where we are, and also needs to be contextualised within that. But also I think it highlights that there is such a substantial amount of work going on, which I will go into in a moment, that the challenge is knowing how best to approach things. And I know the Honourable Lady and her colleagues have outlined some suggestions, which I will try to come on to a number on in a moment. But it also is important that we acknowledge within this debate that a substantial amount of money is going in today. And whilst I don't, it's been a relatively well-regarded debate, and I'm not seeking to make it particularly political, but I have to just highlight, and given the multiple references to austerity, some of the difficult decisions we have had to take over the last 12 years are as a result directly of the spending which was done pre-2010. And if we don't acknowledge that we make decisions and they don't have trade-offs and they don't have consequences, and these consequences are ones we are still living with a decade or so later, despite the fact, in absolute terms, we are spending a substantial amount of additional money beyond what we were spending a decade or so ago. So we're going to spend over 245 billion through the welfare system this financial year, and 110 to support people of working age. And this builds upon wider efforts to lift more people out of poverty, so that it can support people that have been highlighted in the debate today. In 2020-21, for example, there were 1.2 million fewer people in absolute poverty than in 2009-2010, which includes 200,000 fewer children, 500,000 fewer working age adults, and 400,000 fewer pensioners. That isn't to take away from the challenge which has been set. That isn't to take away from accepting that there are challenges today, particularly with cost of living, but it is important that we contextualise where we are. So given the challenges that we have globally at the moment, that's why this year the government has provided over 37 billion pounds worth of emergency support, and we're putting in place more help over the coming months. So in the autumn statement, for example, there was 26 billion pounds of cost of living support, that's taxpayer subsidy, for 23-24. That means that from next year, households on eligible means-tested benefits will receive up to a further £900 in cost of living payments. And from April next year, we're also uprating benefits for working-age households and disabled people, as well as the basic and new state pensions, by over 10%. And benefit cap rates will be increased by the same amount. And just today, in the local government finance settlement, we have announced a further 100 million of support for people who are deemed to be the most vulnerable, including a discretionary element of that, which allows local authorities around the country where there are challenges, whether it be challenges with regards to access to beds or whether it be challenges with regards to something else, to have additional funds to be able to support closing those gaps and to ensure that people have the things that they need. Crucially, there is also a dedicated household support fund overseen by the Department for Work and Pensions, which councils in England can also use to help families struggling with essential household costs, which could include, for example, the purchase of new beds and mattresses. And there is a further 1 billion that is going into that fund over the next financial year, 850 million nearly in England, with the remainder being distributed to it by Barnett formula in the devolved nations. That will mean £2.5 billion of taxpayer subsidy since October 2021, and crucially, with local authorities having the freedom to allocate these funds according to the needs in their communities. And given the acknowledgement from the opposition that this is hidden, or this is difficult to assess, this is difficult to find, which is one of the points that was made a moment ago, the best way in which we can respond to to challenges which are hidden or semi-hidden is to provide freedom to allocate, it's both to provide funds, which we have done, and then to provide the freedom to allocate those funds in the most proportionate and reasonable way in communities, driven by representatives in communities themselves, driven by the kind of councils which the woman from Luton North highlights, who are setting an important, will in one moment, who are setting an important agenda and making important decisions about what's important for their local area. I'll happily give way to the Honourable Lady.
I'm grateful to the Minister for giving way. I just wondered if I could ask him quite a specific question. So some of these families where the referrals are coming through to local charities in Halifax relate to families who are involved in providing kinship care. So where family members at very short notice often take over responsibility for caring for a very young child as a member of their family. I just wondered if, as part of his cross-departmental work, as part of the government's response to the McAllister view, which is looking at the responsibilities and support that kinship carers deserve, he could just have a specific look at the support that's required by kinship carers to check that where young children are placed with family members at very short notice and financial support is not a part of that package for the variety of barriers that some of those families face, and that he can see what else might be able to be done to support those families so that those children in those circumstances are not going without beds.
Minister?
Well, I'm grateful to the Honourable Lady from Halifax for highlighting the hugely important area of kinship care. Is something which I know all members will have an interest in and will have experience of. I certainly have. I've spoken to constituents at length about these issues, and it is an immensely challenging area to know how to get right, because of course ideally in the first instance there wouldn't be a need for that, but this is life and there always is, and where there are challenges, we want to keep young children as close to their families that they know and they understand and friends as possibly can be, and that will inevitably mean that people at short notice take over caring responsibilities which they may not have anticipated and the like. And so there's a very difficult challenge about knowing how to balance that. I will certainly pass on the comments. We'll ensure that the comments of the Honourable Lady is passed on to my colleagues in the Department for Education, who are leading on the McAllister review and the response to it, and to consider specifically the point about kinship care within that, where that may be possible. Just coming back to the point about freedom, 23 councils have already put on record that they are using their funds to provide beds, bedding and blankets to vulnerable residents. And Havering, as an example, have already partnered with local retailers to supply beds, white goods and other essential household items to struggling families. And Blackburn, at the other end of the country, the council has been working hard on the provision of new high-quality beds for children under 7 years of age, as I understand it. And as I say, there are additional discretionary support funds which are available where that is necessary. So in addition, just touching for a moment on the broader point about supporting families, there is the Supporting Families programme between the Department for Levelling Up, which I'm a minister within, and then also the Department for Education, which is seeking to help councils do exactly that, coordinated help for families to overcome multiple and complex problems. Supporting Families is allocated to authorities based on levels of deprivation and the number of families in the local population. So put simply, more deprived areas receive more funding, and that's a programme which also can help some of the drivers of financial insecurity and knock-on effects such as what we are talking about today. So whether it is addressing mental health or drug or alcohol problems, whether it's addressing about finding work or keeping children in schools. And there was a 40% cash uplift in the budget of the funding for this programme, which should mean that 300,000 families are covered in the coming period ahead. And then looking just more broadly again in terms of the role of schools and the Department for Education, this isn't just about council officers working with individual families. Schools play an important role in identifying pupils who may not be getting enough sleep at home. That is why we are here today. That is why Bex Wilson has set up this charity. It's the experience that she saw when she was teaching in Leeds. And through the publication of the SEND Green Paper, an alternative provision green paper, the schools white paper, and our response to the McAllister review, we are creating a system which seeks to firmly work in the interest of vulnerable children and young people. We know that vulnerable children are more absent from school than their peers, and in autumn of last year, a third of all pupils eligible for free school meals missed more than 10% of school sessions, and nearly 1 in 10 pupils eligible for free school meals miss more than 10% of possible school sessions for unauthorised other reasons, compared with only 3% of their peers. And the pupil premium, which is being allocated, will provide over £2.5 billion in 2022-2023 to help schools improve educational outcomes for disadvantaged pupils, which can be used to support social, emotional and behavioural needs, as well as approaches to improve attendance. And every local authority in England must appoint a virtual school head, where there is a statutory duty to promote the educational achievement of children in their care. So, Mr Paisley, in conclusion, I'm grateful again for Bex Wilson and for Zarek and for all of those who have raised this important issue. I am grateful to the honourable members who have spoken today. I think, as I say, there is an absolute commitment and understanding of the challenges across the entirety of the House, which we are trying to talk about here and which we're trying to debate here. I think there is a hope that everybody, even if they disagree with the proposal that the government is putting forward today, which I'm putting forward on behalf of the government, they would recognise there's a substantial amount of work that's being done in this area. There is a substantial amount of funding, a substantial amount of taxpayer support. We all want to achieve the same ends with regards to that. We all recognise there is challenges. We're very grateful for the work that is being done by those who have highlighted it today, and hopefully we can continue to make progress in the coming years ahead whilst continuing to debate the best way and the best approach to do that.
Thank you, Minister. Catherine McKinnell.
Thank you, Mr Paisley, and thank you to honourable members who've contributed to this debate, both from the Labour front bench and from the backbenchers. And I would say thank you for the Minister's response, but I have to say I did expect more. I think it's very concerning that the government don't seem to recognise that there's an issue, don't seem to commit to even understanding the extent of the issue. All we've heard is a list of actions that the government are apparently undertaking, but clearly are not solving the problem. And the reality is, and one of the mothers who spoke to me when I was taking evidence for this debate said that she had fled as a child with her mother from domestic violence, and she remembers how traumatic that was. But when they moved, and she said she felt cushioned by a state that supported them into a new home. She doesn't remember not having a bed when she was growing up. She remembers being looked after and being supported in what was clearly quite a traumatic situation. She's faced that again herself, and she has fled domestic violence with her children, and she was shocked at how little support there is. There was nothing for them. They've managed to secure a house. It had no furniture in it. She said they've lived with one light bulb, that they move from room to room, and no beds for the children. And it is the charity sector that has helped them, not the government. And that is the case up and down the country. Food banks, clothing, housing and furniture is being provided by the charitable sector, not by the state. People in their most desperate circumstances no longer have a safety net. And so, as much as the government and the Minister has set out the support that they might be giving, it's clearly not working, and it's clearly not reaching the right people. So I didn't intend to say that at the end of this debate. I've been left quite moved by some of the evidence I heard, but I'm left quite, not angry, I think a bit despondent by the response from the Minister. I would hope that the government would, of all things, want to tackle children without beds. And I know and would want to know how many children don't have a bed, and how do we solve that? And obviously, whatever the government's doing isn't working, because the number is growing, not reducing, but that's anecdotal, because we don't actually know, because the government hasn't found out or even asked a question. So I would like to see the government go away and think harder about this, because it's not just about those individual children. It's about a lifetime cycle of sleep deprivation that then results in adult mental health issues, because if you haven't slept well as a child, you will take that for the rest of your life. It will affect your education, it will affect your mental health, it will affect your development, it will affect your well-being. Surely we want to put a stop to that, the very basic of having a bed and somewhere safe to sleep. And so I really hope the government goes away and thinks again. And I appreciate it's not all down to the Minister. And I think the fact that we weren't quite sure who was going to respond to this debate is a bit telling of the lack of focus that the government has on child poverty as a whole. Because we have Department for Education that has an interest in children. We have the Department for Health that should have an interest in children's health and well-being. We have the Department for Levelling Up, local government, that should have an interest in making sure at a local level that support is delivered. We have the Department for Work and Pensions that look after those households that need extra support. None of them appear to be talking to each other to develop a holistic strategy to ensure that more children don't fall into poverty, that children have a bed to sleep in, and that we finally turn this around. And I really hope the government listen. And if they won't, I really hope this country votes in a different government that will.
Councillor McKinnell, for that very impassioned wind-up. The question is that the House has considered a petition relating to child bed poverty. As many as are of the opinion say aye, and the contrary no. The ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order. The sitting stands adjourned.
The proceeding has ended.